"Just the janitor," they called him behind his back. "Probably never even served," whispered the young nursing assistant, rolling her eyes as she watched him methodically clean the PTSD ward with unusual care. The staff walked past him like he was invisible, just another minimum wage worker pushing a mop through the halls of the VA hospital. But when a sharp-eyed army doctor noticed the distinctive scars covering the old man's hands and the way he interacted with the combat veterans, everything changed. Because sometimes the most broken warriors become the greatest healers. The Miami VA Medical Center buzzed with the controlled chaos of a major hospital. Doctors rushed between patient rooms, nurses managed complex medication schedules, and administrators juggled budgets and bureaucracy. In the midst of all this activity, one man moved through the halls almost invisibly. Robert "Bobby" Martinez pushed his cleaning cart down the corridor of Ward 3C, the PTSD treatment wing, with methodical precision. At 68, his weathered face bore the lines of someone who'd seen too much and carried it too long. His gray custodial uniform hung loose on a frame that had once been broader, more powerful. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if each step required conscious thought. The hospital staff barely noticed him. To most, he was just part of the background, another contract worker who showed up, did his job, and disappeared. They called him Bobby the Janitor when they bothered to acknowledge him at all, though most conversations about him happened when he wasn't around. "I don't know why they put him on the PTSD ward," complained Jennifer Walsh, a 26-year-old nursing assistant with 2 years' experience. "Old guy moves like he's in slow motion. Probably takes him twice as long to clean those rooms. Maybe he's the only one willing to work that floor," replied Marcus Thompson, an orderly who'd been at the hospital for 6 months. "I heard some of the cleaning crew request transfers away from 3C. Too depressing. Too many problems. Plus, have you seen how weird he gets around the patients?" Jennifer continued. "Like, overly careful or something, probably scared of them." They didn't notice that Bobby Martinez had paused around the corner, close enough to hear their assessment of his work. His grip tightened slightly on the mop handle, but his expression remained neutral. He'd heard worse. What the staff didn't understand was that Bobby's slowness was intentional. Every room he entered on Ward 3C contained a veteran struggling with invisible wounds, nightmares, flashbacks, survivor's guilt, the weight of memories that civilian minds couldn't process. Bobby knew because he'd been there, still was there in many ways. His deliberate pace wasn't inefficiency, it was respect. His careful movements weren't fear, they were understanding. And his weird interactions with patients came from a place these young staff members couldn't comprehend. Because Bobby Martinez wasn't just cleaning rooms. He was providing silent fellowship to men and women who recognized something in his eyes that the medical staff, despite all their training, couldn't offer. The understanding that comes from shared trauma. Room 312 housed Staff Sergeant David Kim, 29 years old, 2 tours in Afghanistan, medically retired after an IED blast, left him with traumatic brain injury and severe PTSD. David hadn't spoken to anyone. Doctors, nurses, family, in 3 weeks. He sat by the window most days, staring at nothing, lost in memories that played on repeat. When Bobby entered to clean the room, he moved with unusual quiet, even for him. No unnecessary noise, no sudden movements. He cleaned around David's space with careful precision, never encroaching on the veteran's personal bubble, but maintaining a peaceful presence. "You don't have to be so quiet," David said suddenly, his first words in days. "I'm not going to flip out or anything." Bobby paused in his mopping. "Wasn't worried about that, son. Just showing respect." David looked at him for the first time, really looked. "You served?" Bobby continued cleaning, not making eye contact. "Long time ago. Different war." "How long ago?" "Vietnam, 69 to 71. David nodded slowly. "Bad time to be there." "They were all bad times to be there," Bobby replied quietly. They didn't speak again that day, but something had shifted. When Bobby returned the next morning, David was sitting up, more alert. The day after that, David asked about Bobby's unit, his deployment. Bobby answered briefly, factually, without elaboration or drama. Over the following week, other staff members began to notice that David Kim was talking again, but only to the janitor. During Bobby's cleaning rounds, David would ask questions, share fragments of his own experience, engage in the kind of conversation that the psychiatrists had been trying to encourage for months. "It's unusual," Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the ward psychiatrist, noted during a staff meeting. Kim's breakthrough coincided exactly with increased interaction with the custodial staff. "You mean Bobby?" Jennifer Walsh looked skeptical. What could he possibly say to help? The guy barely finished high school. Dr. Mitchell frowned. "Where did you get that information?" "I mean, he's a janitor. How much education could he have?" "Actually," Dr. Mitchell checked her notes, "his employment file indicates some college, but that's not the point. Sometimes healing comes from unexpected sources." What Dr. Mitchell didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Bobby Martinez's some college had been achieved through the GI Bill after 3 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star had earned him an early return from Southeast Asia. His education had been interrupted by PTSD so severe that he'd spent 2 years in psychiatric hospitals, fighting demons that had no names in 1972. Dr. James Rodriguez had been working at the Miami VA for 8 years, serving as an Army Reserve colonel on weekends and a full-time psychiatrist during the week. He specialized in combat trauma and had deployed twice to Iraq as a military psychiatrist. His experience with battlefield medicine gave him insights that civilian doctors often lacked. On a Tuesday morning, Dr. Rodriguez was reviewing patient files when he noticed an unusual pattern. Several veterans on Ward 3C had shown marked improvement in their willingness to engage in therapy, their compliance with medication, and their overall emotional stability. The common factor seemed to be increased interaction with custodial staff during cleaning hours. Curious, Dr. Rodriguez decided to observe during the next cleaning cycle. He positioned himself at the nurse's station where he could watch Bobby Martinez work without being obtrusive. What he saw immediately caught his attention. Bobby's approach to the veteran patients was fundamentally different from how he interacted with civilian staff. With patients, his movements were more deliberate, his presence more intentional. He seemed to understand instinctively which veterans needed silence, which ones might appreciate brief conversation, and which ones required extra space. But it was Bobby's hands that made Dr. Rodriguez look closer. As Bobby adjusted his grip on the mop handle, Dr. Rodriguez caught sight of distinctive scarring across the knuckles and forearms, the kind of scarring that came from shrapnel, the jagged, irregular patterns that field surgeons did their best to repair under combat conditions. There were also burn marks, old and faded, and what looked like surgical scars from multiple procedures. Dr. Rodriguez had seen enough combat injuries to recognize them immediately. These weren't work-related injuries or accidents. These were war wounds. During his lunch break, Dr. Rodriguez made some discreet inquiries. Bobby Martinez's employment file was sparse, basic information, emergency contacts, work history showing various custodial and maintenance jobs over the past 40 years. But there was a note in his benefits section indicating VA disability compensation. That evening, Dr. Rodriguez pulled Bobby aside. "Mr. Martinez, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Bobby looked wary but nodded. They walked to a quiet corner of the break room. "I couldn't help but notice your interactions with our patients," Dr. Rodriguez began carefully. "You seem to have a natural understanding of their needs." Bobby shrugged. "Just trying to do my job without causing problems." "Those scars on your hands, combat-related?" Bobby's expression closed off slightly. "Old injuries, nothing special." Dr. Rodriguez studied him carefully. "Vietnam, you mentioned to Staff Sergeant Kim. What unit?" "1st Cavalry Division, then Special Forces," Bobby answered quietly, then immediately looked like he regretted sharing that information. Dr. Rodriguez felt his perspective shift completely. Special Forces in Vietnam wasn't just military service. It was the most dangerous, psychologically demanding combat experience of that era. The men who'd served in SOG, Special Operations Group units, had endured trauma that mental health professionals were still learning to treat. "How long were you in Special Forces?" 18 months, until I couldn't be anymore. The simple statement carried enormous weight. Dr. Rodriguez understood that Bobby Martinez wasn't just a janitor who happened to be a veteran. He was a decorated combat soldier whose trauma had been so severe that it had derailed his entire life trajectory. Mr. Martinez, would you be willing to discuss participating in our peer support program? I think your experience could be incredibly valuable to our patients. Bobby shook his head immediately. I'm not qualified for anything like that. I just clean floors. You're more qualified than most of our licensed counselors, Dr. Rodriguez replied. You have something they'll never have. You've been where these patients are. You understand their experience from the inside. Bobby looked uncomfortable. I appreciate the thought, Doc, but I'm not the right guy for that kind of responsibility. I've got my own problems to manage. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, understanding the reluctance. Just think about it. What you're already doing. Just being present. Just understanding. It's making a difference. These men are talking again because of you. Word of Dr. Rodriguez's discovery spread quietly through the medical staff. Not gossip, but professional awareness that one of their custodial workers was actually a combat veteran with direct experience relevant to their patient population. The revelation changed how some staff members viewed Bobby Martinez, but not everyone was ready to adjust their assumptions. So what if he was in Vietnam? Jennifer Walsh said during a break room conversation. That was like 50 years ago. What does that have to do with treating PTSD today? Are you serious? Dr. Rodriguez looked at her with genuine surprise. Combat trauma doesn't have an expiration date. If anything, his experience gives him insights we can't get from textbooks. But he's not trained in modern therapy techniques, Marcus Thompson added. He doesn't have medical education or psychological training. Dr. Rodriguez set down his coffee carefully. Let me explain something to both of you. Mr. Martinez served with special forces during the most intensive period of the Vietnam War. The psychological trauma experienced by those units was so severe that many veterans are still receiving treatment 50 years later. The man you've been dismissing as just a janitor has lived with combat PTSD longer than you've been alive. He paused, looking at their skeptical faces. And in the past month, since he started working this ward, our patient engagement rates have improved by 40%. Veterans who wouldn't talk to psychiatrists, social workers, or chaplains are opening up to him. Not because he has degrees or certifications, but because he understands their experience in ways we never will. Jennifer still looked doubtful. But what can he actually do? I mean, medically? He's not providing medical treatment, Dr. Rodriguez explained patiently. He's providing something more valuable, recognition. These patients look at him and see someone who survived what they're going through. That gives them hope in ways that medication and therapy sessions can't. What Dr. Rodriguez didn't share with the staff was what he'd learned from discreet inquiries through military channels. Bobby Martinez hadn't just served in special forces, he'd been part of highly classified cross-border operations into Cambodia and Laos. His service record, what little was available, showed multiple decorations for valor and 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in action. More importantly, Bobby's post-war experience had been a textbook case of untreated PTSD. Hospitalization, failed relationships, decades of minimum wage jobs, substance abuse problems, and social isolation. He was a walking example of what happened to combat veterans when the system failed them. But he was also proof that survival was possible, that men could carry impossible burdens and still find ways to serve others. Over the following weeks, Bobby Martinez found himself in an unusual position. Doctors began consulting with him informally about specific patients, not for medical advice, but for insights into the veteran mindset that their training hadn't provided. Staff Sergeant Kim isn't responding to traditional therapy approaches, Dr. Rodriguez mentioned during one of their conversations. Any thoughts on why he might be resistant? Bobby considered the question carefully. Kim's got survivor's guilt, lost his whole squad except for him and one other guy. He doesn't think he deserves to get better when his friends didn't make it home. How do you know that? Because he told me, and because I felt the same way for about 20 years. Dr. Rodriguez made notes. What helped you work through it? Bobby smiled grimly. Time, and realizing that staying broken wasn't honoring their memory, It was wasting the life they died protecting. These conversations became more frequent. Bobby found himself explaining veteran behavior patterns, suggesting approaches that might work better than standard protocols, helping doctors understand the cultural and psychological aspects of military trauma that weren't covered in medical school. But the real transformation was happening with the patients themselves. Ward 3C, which had been one of the most challenging assignments in the hospital, became noticeably calmer. Veterans were more cooperative with treatment, more willing to engage in therapy, more responsive to medication adjustments. The change was so significant that hospital administrators began asking questions. "I don't understand the improvement," the nursing supervisor told Dr. Rodriguez during a monthly review. "Same staff, same protocols, same patient population. But our incident reports are down 60%, therapy participation is up 45%, and patient satisfaction scores are the highest we've ever recorded." Dr. Rodriguez smiled. Sometimes healing comes from unexpected sources. What the supervisor didn't know was that Bobby Martinez had become an unofficial peer counselor for the entire ward. Veterans sought him out during his cleaning rounds, sharing concerns they wouldn't discuss with medical staff. Bobby listened without judgment, offered perspective without preaching, and provided the kind of understanding that came only from shared experience. He wasn't practicing medicine or therapy. He was simply being present as someone who'd walked the same dark paths and found ways to keep going. Not everyone was comfortable with Bobby's growing influence on the ward. Some staff members felt that his unofficial counseling role undermined their professional authority. "It's inappropriate," complained Dr. Helen Barnes, a clinical psychologist who'd been at the hospital for 12 years. "This man has no credentials, no training in modern therapeutic techniques. We can't have custodial staff providing mental health services." "He's not providing mental health services," Dr. Rodriguez replied during a staff meeting. "He's providing peer support, which is a recognized component of veteran care. Peer support should be conducted by trained peer specialists with proper certification," Dr. Barnes insisted. "Not by someone whose only qualification is that he's old and was in a war." The tension came to a head when Jennifer Walsh filed a formal complaint with hospital administration, claiming that Bobby Martinez was overstepping his role and interfering with patient treatment. The complaint triggered a review process that could have resulted in Bobby's termination. During the investigation, several interesting facts emerged. First, every patient on Ward 3C was asked about their interactions with Bobby Martinez. Without exception, they reported positive experiences and credited him with helping them feel more comfortable and understood. Second, the ward's medical outcomes had improved dramatically since Bobby began working there. Medication compliance was up, therapy attendance was up, and incidents requiring security intervention were down significantly. Third, when investigators interviewed Bobby about his interactions with patients, they discovered that his approach was remarkably sophisticated. He wasn't offering medical advice or attempting therapy. He was practicing what military psychologists call battle buddy support, the kind of peer assistance that had been formally incorporated into modern military mental health programs. Most importantly, when investigators reviewed Bobby's background more thoroughly, they discovered that he wasn't just a veteran with good instincts. He'd actually completed 2 years of college psychology courses through the VA's vocational rehabilitation program in the 1980s, before his own PTSD symptoms had forced him to withdraw. The investigation concluded that Bobby Martinez was not overstepping his role, but rather providing valuable peer support that enhanced rather than interfered with professional treatment. The hospital administration's investigation had an unexpected result. Instead of disciplining Bobby Martinez, they offered him a position as a formal peer support specialist, with training, certification, and a significant pay increase. Bobby initially refused. "I appreciate the offer," he told Dr. Rodriguez, "but I'm not looking to change careers at 68. I've found my place doing what I do." "But you could help so many more veterans," Dr. Rodriguez argued. "Your impact could extend beyond just this ward." Bobby was quiet for a long time. "Doc, you don't understand. I've been broken for most of my adult life. PTSD nearly killed me twice, once from the symptoms, once from what I did trying to escape them. I've been fired from more jobs than I can count, burned through relationships, spent years homeless. He gestured around the hospital. This job, this place, it's the first time in 40 years that I've felt useful. I don't want to risk that by trying to be something I'm not sure I can be. Dr. Rodriguez understood the fear, but he also saw the opportunity. What if we started small, just a few hours a week, working with veterans who specifically request peer support? You'd keep your custodial position, but add some formal counseling responsibilities. After several weeks of consideration, Bobby agreed to a trial program. 3 hours a week, he would work as a certified peer support specialist while maintaining his custodial duties. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Veterans who had been resistant to traditional therapy began opening up in peer support sessions. Bobby's combination of lived experience, natural empathy, and hard-earned wisdom created an environment where healing could begin in ways that formal therapy sessions hadn't achieved. More importantly, Bobby discovered that helping others helped him process his own trauma in ways he'd never experienced. For the first time since Vietnam, he felt like his suffering had meaning, that his struggles could serve a purpose beyond mere survival. 6 months after Bobby Martinez began working as a peer support specialist, Ward 3C had become a model for veteran mental health treatment. Other VA hospitals sent observers to study their approach, and Bobby found himself training other peer support specialists. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who'd been dismissed as just a janitor was now teaching licensed professionals how to connect with combat veterans. During one training session, a young social worker asked Bobby about his approach to resistant patients. "You don't push," Bobby explained. "You just show up, consistently, reliably, without judgment. Veterans have been failed by a lot of systems, a lot of people. They need to know you're not going anywhere before they'll trust you with their pain." "But how do you get them to open up initially?" Bobby smiled. "You don't try to get them to do anything. You just be present. Let them see that you understand, that you've been where they are. Eventually, they'll start talking because they need to, not because you want them to." The training sessions became popular enough that the VA began sending Bobby to other facilities to share his approach. He never spoke about his own service record or decorations. That information remained classified and irrelevant to his current mission. What mattered was that he understood the weight veterans carried, and he could help them learn that carrying it didn't mean carrying it alone. 2 years after the investigation that nearly cost him his job, Bobby Martinez was honored at the VA's annual recognition ceremony. Not for his custodial work, though he continued to take pride in that, but for his contribution to veteran mental health care. Jennifer Walsh, the nursing assistant who had filed the complaint against him, was in the audience. She approached him after the ceremony. "Mr. Martinez, I owe you an apology, a big one." Bobby looked at her kindly. "You were protecting your patients. Nothing wrong with that." "No, I was being judgmental and ignorant. I saw a janitor and assumed that's all you were. I'm sorry." Bobby nodded. "We all make assumptions based on what we can see. The important thing is being willing to look deeper when it matters." Jennifer had indeed learned to look deeper. She'd requested transfers to work with Bobby's peer support program and was pursuing additional training in veteran mental health services. "What changed your mind?" Bobby asked. "Watching you work with the patients, seeing how much you cared, how much you understood, and realizing that healing doesn't always come from diplomas and degrees. Sometimes it comes from shared experience and genuine compassion." Bobby smiled. "Now you're starting to understand what real medicine looks like." At 70, Bobby Martinez still arrives at the Miami VA Medical Center every morning at 6:30 a.m., 30 minutes before his shift begins. He still maintains his custodial responsibilities, taking pride in keeping the facilities clean and comfortable for the veterans who depend on them. But 3 days a week, he also sits in a small office on Ward 3C, meeting with combat veterans who need to talk to someone who understands their experience from the inside. His office walls display no diplomas or certificates, just a simple placard reading Peer Support Specialist and a photo of his old Special Forces unit from 1970. The scars on his hands, once hidden beneath cleaning gloves and dismissed as workplace injuries, now serve a different purpose. Veterans notice them during counseling sessions, recognizing the marks of combat trauma. The scars become conversation starters, proof that survival is possible, evidence that wounds can heal even when they never fully disappear. Dr. Rodriguez, now the hospital's chief of psychiatry, often reflects on how close they came to missing Bobby's potential entirely. A complaint filed by a well-meaning but ignorant staff member had nearly cost the hospital one of its most effective therapeutic resources. Bobby Martinez taught us something important, Dr. Rodriguez tells new medical staff during orientation. Healing doesn't always come in the forms we expect. Sometimes the most effective interventions come from the people we're most likely to overlook. Bobby never talks about his decorations, his classified missions, or the specific details of his combat service. That's not what veterans need to hear. What they need is someone who understands that coming home from war doesn't mean the war is over, and that carrying invisible wounds doesn't make you weak or broken. His message is simple but powerful. Survival is possible, healing is real, and no veteran has to carry their burden alone. The young staff members, who once dismissed him as just a janitor, now understand that they were working alongside a decorated combat veteran whose trauma had been so severe that it nearly destroyed him, but whose recovery had been so complete that he could help others find their way back from the same darkness. Bobby Martinez proves every day that heroes don't always wear uniforms, and healing doesn't always require degrees. Sometimes the most powerful medicine is simply the presence of someone who's been through hell and found their way back, scarred but not broken, wounded but not defeated, forever changed but still standing. In the end, the hands that once carried weapons in the jungles of Vietnam now carry hope through the halls of a VA hospital, reminding every veteran who meets him that their service mattered, their struggles are understood, and their healing is possible. Because some wounds are too deep for bandages, but not too deep for brotherhood.